The three-brained beings of your planet who became members of this society actually did a great deal in respect of approaching objective knowledge, which had never been done there before and which perhaps will never be repeated. And here it is impossible not to express regret and to repeat that to the most great misfortune of all terrestrial three-brained beings of later epochs, it was just then, when after incredible being labors by members of that great society that required tempo of work, had already been established with regard to discernment, conscious on their part, and also with regard to their unconscious preparation for the welfare of their descendants, that, in the heat of it all, certain of them constated, as I have already told you, that something serious was to occur to their planet in the near future. For the purpose of discerning the character of the anticipated serious event, they dispersed over the whole planet, and shortly afterwards, as I have already told you, the aforesaid second transalpalnian perturbation occurred to this ill-fated planet of yours. Well then, my boy, when, after this catastrophe, a number of the surviving beings, members of that great learned society, gradually came together again, they no longer having their native country, first settled together with most of the other surviving beings in the center of the continent Grabancy, but later, when they had, on the continent Grabancy, come to themselves, a little after the cataclysm not according to law, which had occurred, they decided jointly to try to re-establish and perhaps to continue to actualize in practice all those tasks which had formed the basis of their last society. As the manifestations of those abnormal conditions of being existence of most of the three-brained beings there, which had already been established before the catastrophe, had by this time already begun to boil furiously on the said part of the surface of the continent Grabancy, these surviving members of the society Akhaldan looked for another place on the same continent for their permanent existence more suitable for this work of theirs, which demanded complete separateness. Such a suitable place they found in the valley of the large river flowing on the north of the said continent, and there indeed they all migrated together with their families to continue in isolation the attainment of the tasks set by their society. This entire region, through which the said large river flowed, they first named Sakron Akari, but this name was afterwards several times changed, and at the present time this region is called Egypt, while the said large river they called Nipil Huachi is now, as I have already said, called the Nile. Soon after, certain former members of the learned society Akhaldan had settled on this part of the surface of the planet Earth. All the beings of our tribe, who then existed on the surface of that planet, which has taken your fancy, migrated to the same place. In the relations of our tribe with that part of your planet, and also with the first migration there of the chance surviving former members of the society Akhaldan, were as follows. I told you once that just before the second transalpalnian perturbation, our party Pythoness, while prophesying, insisted that all the beings of our tribe should, without delay, migrate for the continuation of their existence on that planet to a definite part of the surface of that same continent now called Africa. This definite part of the surface of the continent, which the Pythoness indicated, lay just at the source of the said large river Nipil Huachi, where the beings of our tribe existed all the time the said second transalpalnian perturbation lasted, as well as later when everything had gradually resumed its relatively normal state, and when most of the surviving beings had then almost forgotten what had happened and had again formed just as if nothing had occurred to them. One of their famous centers of culture in the very center of that future Africa. And it was just when the former members of the society Akhaldan were searching for a suitable place for their permanent existence that they chanced to meet a number of the beings of our tribe who advised them to migrate to the country further down the said river. Our acquaintanceship and our friendly relations with many of the former members of the society Akhaldan had already begun on the continent Atlantis Atlantis almost from the founding of that society. Do you remember I told you that when I descended to that planet for the first time, and the beings of our tribe assembled in the city of Samlios with my participation in order together to find a way out of that difficult situation that had been created? Those general meetings of ours were held in one of the sections of the principal cathedral of the society Akhaldan, and from that time on, good relations were established between many beings of our tribe and certain members of this society. And there, in that future Egypt, whether both had migrated in the said way, the relations of the beings of our tribe with the authentic former members themselves who chanced to be saved, and also with the descendants of other authentic members, remained uninterrupted and continued almost until the departure of our tribe from your planet. So, just wanted to add a few of my own thoughts to this passage. So what Gurdjieff is basically saying, in layman's terms, not in all and everything diction, is that back when Atlantis still existed, there was the society Akhaldan, which, we could think of as something like a secret society, or a mystery school is another term we would use today. And the society of Akhaldan was founded by Beltukasi in Atlantis. And before a cataclysm came, which is what wiped out Atlantis according to the text, which Gurdjieff calls it the second Transalpalnian perturbation. So this was the cataclysm that occurred, which, basically, whether it was a tsunami or I don't know, but submerged the continent of Atlantis was that second Transalpalnian perturbation. So some of the members of the society Akhaldan were able to discern this beforehand, through their knowledge and wisdom. They were able to tell that something was going to happen. So as Gurdjieff said, Akhaldan sent out its members across the earth to try and find out, if they could figure out exactly what was going to happen. And during that time when the members were dispersed, that's when the cataclysm happened. So after that happened, you had a few of the members of Akhaldan who survived that weren't on Atlantis, that were on other parts of the earth when the cataclysm struck. After that, the surviving members came to Africa, which Gurdjieff calls Grabansi at that time. And they all gathered at one location where, not only Akhaldans, but other just normal humans, three-brain beings were, recollecting there. And after a set amount of times, Gurdjieff said they came to themselves and they decided to, look for a permanent place where they could resume their work. And that was the founding of Egypt, because Akhaldan was searching for a place where they could kind of, a suitable place for them to resume their work. And that's how they, came upon that place on the Nile and founded Egypt, along with, Gurdjieff says, with Beelzebub and his sort of, species, I guess you could call them. So I found that really interesting, and it also correlates with other research I've done with, if you look into the work of Dr. Robert Schoch, which I'm sure some of you have heard of him. He did a lot of work with John Anthony West. John Anthony West has a great, he put out great work, but one of the things he did was a series called Magical Egypt, and I think you can still find this on YouTube. It's an 8-part series where he basically gives his theories on what the real history of Egypt is, in his opinion. And Dr. Robert Schoch is a geologist at Boston University. So, he's got the credentials in academia. He's not an outsider like someone like John Anthony West would be to that, to academia, basically. But they came together in their research, and Robert Schoch confirmed a suspicion or a theory of John Anthony West's, which was that, which he took actually initially from Schwaller de Lubitz, who was I believe a French writer, and John Anthony West had found in one of Schwaller de Lubitz's writings that there was rain erosion on the Sphinx, and that stuck in his mind. And through his research, and bringing Schoch into his research, Dr. Robert Schoch also actually confirmed that there is water erosion on the Sphinx. Now, if you look at the, we can call it the mainstream academia theories and hypotheses of the age of the Sphinx and the pyramids, I believe they say it's somewhere around, like, I'm going to guess between 4 and 2,000 years old, something like that. I could be a little bit off on that, but I don't think I'm off by too much. But what John Anthony West says is that the Sphinx and the pyramids are much, much older than that, chiefly, because of other evidence, but really the linchpin is the water erosion on the Sphinx, which academia has never, to my knowledge, has never acknowledged, has never investigated or debunked, so they haven't addressed it, basically. So John Anthony West's research, along with Robert Schoch's research, would correlate with what, Gurdjieff is saying here, that Egypt as we know it is actually much older than what we're told in the mainstream, and further that Egypt wasn't a civilization that just sort of developed and flourished. The knowledge and the high learning came from Atlantis and settled in Egypt, and then so it was already ready made, is what I'm saying. And actually, what we see in Egypt is a degradation of that. We don't see a normal culture that's farming and then they have time to build the pyramids and they flourish. No, what we see is an already incredibly learned, intelligent, advanced society, the remnants of a, could call it mystery school from Atlantis called Akhaldan, settling in Egypt. And they were the ones that, sort of began that culture. So the religion, astrology, all the sciences we think of coming from Egypt, which, influence all of the Western world, because it went on through Greece and Rome and, down to today. So that religion and all the science in Egypt, according to All and Everything, and then also corroborated by that other research I mentioned, would have been much older and come ready-made from Atlantis. So just an interesting thing to think about. I tend to agree with, I think Gurdjieff was obviously tapped into a lot of things that, normal people just aren't. He's studying with mystery schools, traveling, obviously developed greatly himself as well, the discernment and finding the truth. And then that also correlates with the other research I mentioned. So interesting to think about how, the knowledge we think of in Egypt, then spreading through Greece, Rome, and everywhere else, coming ready-made from Atlantis through the society Akhaldan. So if you guys have any other thoughts on that, feel free to give some comments below. And thanks for listening.